Mr. President, I shouldn't need to tell anyone that the National Defense Authorization Act is one of the most important bills we consider each year. Issues may wax and wane in importance in Washington, but national security is and must be a perennial priority. There's never a time when we can afford to put our national defense on the back burner or underfund our nation's military. Unfortunately, that point seems to be lost on the Democrat leader. It's been 5 months since the Senate Armed Services Committee passed the fiscal year 2025 National Defense Authorization Act. 5 months, Mr. President. We're almost 2 months into the new fiscal year, and yet, once again this week, the NDAA will not be on the floor here in the Senate. Mr. President, delays to the National Defense Authorization Act are always problematic. As I said, there is no time at which we can afford to put our national security on the back burner. But delays are especially problematic at a time when our military preparedness is lagging, and America's adversaries are flexing their muscle. In July of this year, the Bipartisan Commission on the National Defense Strategy published its final report. And I just want to read a couple of lines from that report. This is from the report summary, and I quote, "The Commission finds that the U.S. military lacks both the capabilities and the capacity required to be confident it can deter and prevail in combat," end quote. Now let me just repeat that, Mr. President. Think about that for a moment. The Commission finds that the U.S. military lacks both the capabilities and the capacity required to be confident it can deter and prevail in combat. That is a pretty damning statement. Elsewhere, the Commission notes, and I quote again, "The Commission finds that in many ways, China is outpacing the United States and has largely negated the U.S. military advantage in the Western Pacific through 2 decades of focused military investment. Without significant change by the United States, the balance of power will continue to shift in China's favor," end quote. Without significant change by the United States, the balance of power will continue to shift in China's favor. And from the Strategic Posture Commission report in 2023, and I quote again, "Today the United States is on the cusp of having not one, but 2 nuclear peer adversaries, each with ambitions to change the international status quo by force if necessary, a situation which the United States did not anticipate and for which it is not prepared," end quote. A situation which the United States did not anticipate and for which it is not prepared. In other words, Mr. President, we have work to do, a lot of work to do. And that work is being inhibited by the Democrat leader's decision not to prioritize the National Defense Authorization Act and defense spending bills. And needless to say, while the Democrat leader delays, the world isn't getting any safer. China, which has grown increasingly aggressive in the Pacific, is investing heavily in its military and is outpacing our military in modern capabilities like hypersonic missiles. This past week alone, China unveiled a new stealth fighter jet along with other advanced technologies. Russia, meanwhile, continues its war of aggression in Ukraine, most recently with a massive missile attack this weekend on Ukrainian infrastructure. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Hamas continues to hold hostages it seized in its attack on October 7th of last year, including Americans. And Iran-backed proxies continue to menace both Israel and U.S. assets in the region. Iran has spent decades fomenting unrest in the Middle East, and the news that it intends to increase its military budget by a staggering 200% next year suggests that the country has no plans to abandon its destabilizing activities. Mr. President, I could go on. Each day's news is a reminder that we live in an increasingly dangerous world, and that while we never invite conflict, we have to be prepared for it. The Democrat leader may have chosen to spend his time this year on show votes and Biden nominees, but next year, control of the Senate will be different. And I will tell my colleagues right now that in the 119th Congress, neither the NDAA nor military preparedness will be put on the back burner. Under Republican governance, providing for our nation's defense and supporting our men and women in uniform will not only continue to be one of Congress's most important obligations, it will be treated as such. Mr. President, I yield the floor.